Well, good afternoon, folk, and it's time for another session of mathematical literacy. Absolutely. Okay, so you can forget about all the hard times you've had today. You can forget about all the rubbish you've done, like science and maths and geography. It's time for maths literacy. Okay, the good stuff. Now, today what we're going to be looking at is we're going to be focusing on the whole topic of graphs. Okay, and remember, folk, and you've got to remember this, that no matter what section of work we are doing, they're all equally important. Now, graph work can count up to 25% of your final matric examination. You have to know how to do it. So let's look at our very first slide. And our very first slide here shows us the type of things that we have to know how to do. So first of all, with graph, we have a little checklist. And our checklist is telling us this, that number one, we have to be able to draw graphs. Okay? Now, guys, we say you have to be able to draw graphs. You've got to be able to draw those graphs with the use of a table for paper one. But there's nothing to stop an examiner giving you some sort of information that you've got to interpret, and with that interpretation then put it into a type of formula. And then from that formula, draw an actual graph. Okay, an examiner is allowed to do that, especially with paper two. But with paper one, what we're saying is you've got to be able to draw a graph using a table of data. Right. Now, the next thing we've got to be able to do is we have to be able to interpret different types of graphs. And this is important, folk, the interpretation of those graphs. And usually the interpretation comes in a paper two. It can come in a paper one, where we ask you simple, basic little facts about the graph. But when it comes to interpreting, that's normally in a paper two, where we say, why do you think this is happening? Or what do you suppose would happen if that happened? Okay? So you're looking at your graph and you're coming up with a full interpretation. But in paper one, we can ask you some very basic little concepts or basic little questions about the graph that you're actually doing. Okay? So we've got to be able to interpret. And what type of graphs? Well, there are all kinds, hey? You've got to know how to do these line graphs. You've got to be able to understand bar graphs and pie charts. And pie charts and bar graphs normally come under the whole section of statistics. All right? But remember, we are allowed to mingle a bit of graph work, a bit of stats, a bit of finance, and come up with a whole final question, mixing everything up. Now, what I'm going to do in this session is we're going to look at a few questions from past paper ones, and then we're also going to look at a question or two from a paper two. So we're going to start looking at very basic little concepts and then make it more and more difficult. Right, let's get started. So, question number one we're going to look at. And folk, from this you can see that it comes from your November 2011 paper, paper one, and it was question 1.3. Now, it's quite a bit of reading, so let's have a look at it. And once we've read the question, I'm then going to show you what I would do to that question if I was answering it in my final matric exam. So let's have a look. So, Facebook and Twitter are two international social networking sites. Individuals can use Facebook and Twitter to communicate with one another via the internet. The following statistics about Facebook and Twitter come from a December 2010 article on the website www.digitalbuzzblock.com. Okay, and these are the facts. Number one, Facebook has 500 million users, of which 230 are male. Twitter, and I'm going to do this in a different color, Twitter, on the other hand, have 106 million users, of which 50,88 million are male. Right. Now, remember I said I'm going to show you what I would do if I was answering this question, and I've actually done it while I read the question. I took a pen, and you would take a marker in the exam. And what I've done is straight away I've made Facebook one color and Twitter another color. Can you have a look at this? So I've made Facebook all my green, and I've looked at Twitter in orange. Now, in an exam, you've got highlighters, and guys, take highlighters into the exams and use them. Underline, highlight certain things that are important that you are going to need. And there are two things that I've realized that are important in this question. Number one, we're dealing with two different social networking type of communication things. One is Facebook, the other is Twitter. That's fact number one. Fact number two is this, that they're giving us figures, but they're very quick to say, and these figures belong to males. Let's have a look at this. Facebook has 500 million users, of which 230 million are male. Now why would they have told us that? I'm sure they've told us that because somewhere along the lines they're going to ask us about female users. All right? And so straight away I'm defining, hold on, this question is looking at males. So I must be aware that there's another figure that is related to the females. Got that? Okay, so we've looked at Facebook, and we know there's Twitter. We know there are 500 million users on Facebook, of which 230 million are male. Twitter has 106 million users, of which 50,88 million are male. Right, so because we know the male, we can work out the female. How? It's quite simple, eh? We take our total minus the male, and that will give us our female users. And I'm sure that's going to be one of the questions. So now, let's look at our very first question. First question. Calculate the difference between the number of users of the two social networks. Well, that's kind of easy, isn't it? Because all we're going to say is, right, the difference is, and notice it's the total difference. It's not saying the difference in the males or the difference in the females, but the overall difference. So we're going to say, right, here in Facebook, we have 500 million users. So I'm going to say straight away, the difference is going to be 500 million minus 106 million, 106 million. And my answer, and guys, again, let's use the calculator. Why not? Okay? You've got a calculator, use it. So we're going to say, right, I've got 500 minus 106 million equals, and my answer is 394 million. So I've got 394 million is the difference with the number of users that I have. I knew this question was not going to be hard. Why? Because if I look at the question, I can see it was only worth, let's have a look, 2 marks. And I also know, guys, let's admit, it's a paper 1. In paper 1, they're not going to challenge me too much with my thinking process. They just want to make sure, do I have the skills? Do I have the skills to interpret the question? Do I have the skills to do basic little concepts like adding, subtracting, etc.? Okay? And that's exactly what they've tested, and that's what I've answered. Question number 2. It says this. Sorry, still question 1, but the next part of it. Determine the number of female users of Twitter. Now that's exactly what I said they were going to ask, isn't it? So let's have a look at it. So, Twitter, let's go. We've got 106 million users, of which 50,88 million are male. So the number of female, I'm going to say, well, that's quite easy. I've got 106 million, okay, minus 50,88 million. And again, don't hurt yourself. Let your calculator do the work. So let's do that. We're going to say, right, 106 minus 50.88 equals, and my answer is 55,12. 55,12 what? 55,12 million. Okay. That's the number of females. Guys, this is not hard at all. Let's keep going. Next question. Calculate the percentage of Facebook users that are male. All right, now, whenever I hear the word or see the word percentage, I know that the number 100 has got to fit in there somewhere, because percentage means out of 100, doesn't it? So is percentage 100? Where am I going to find the 100? Well, let's look. The percentage of Facebook users that are male. And if we look at it, we know that we have 230 male. So I'm going to say I've got 230 million over 500 million. I'm going to multiply that by 100 to find out the actual percentage. Okay? Now, do I have to write 230 million? Well, I don't really have to in this case, because both the 230 and the 500,000 are millions. Okay, but if it makes you feel better, write it as millions. Let's do it, in fact. Why not? So I've got 230. How do I do million? I add 6 noughts. There it is. I add 6 noughts. There they are. So now I have 500 million, 230 million times 100. Again, folks, let our calculator do it. Okay, so we're going to say, right, fraction button, 230 million, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, over 500 million. 500, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, okay? Then we're going to multiply that by 100, because we're changing it to a percent, and my answer is 46%. So I have 46%. Okay. Why did I say you don't have to write million? I'll show you why. If you look here carefully, in the good old days when you were a little kid in grade 2 or 3 or even grade 4 or 5, whenever you dealt with fractions, you would always cross out noughts on the top line and on the bottom, didn't you? So if I look at this, if I crossed out these 6 noughts here and I crossed out these 6 noughts here, I haven't changed the sum at all. I've just reduced the top and the bottom line. So the fraction or the power of that fraction remains the same. But you know what, guys? If that confuses you, rather write out 230 million. Rather write out 500 million. And then let your calculator do it the way we did it, and you can't go wrong. Cool. Let's move on. Now, my next part of that question says this. Right. Now what we're doing is we're looking at a comparison of users of Facebook and Twitter for December 2010. And what you will now notice is we're putting it on a graph. Let's just have a look at this graph before we even look at the question. Let's have a look at the graph just like you would do in a matric exam. So if I opened up this question in my matric exam, I would look at it and say, right, before I even look at the question, let me make some sort of sense of this graph that's in front of me. Because by making some sort of sense of this graph, it's going to help me answer the questions later on. So let's have a look at this graph. And I'm going to change my color to green. And the reason why I'm not using yellow is because yellow is already on the graph. And you can see that my yellow lines in those special bars represent Facebook. Can you see that? Facebook is represented with the yellow stripes. Now, the clear bars are represented by Twitter. So if you look at the first set of columns over here, you can see that they represent the users who update their status daily. 12% of users on Facebook are updating on a daily basis. Now, if 12% are updating, that means that there's some that don't update every single day. Okay. And what's percentage out of? It's out of 100. So if 12% are updating, that means I've got 88% that are not updating. Do you see how we get that? All right. In the same way, if you look at Twitter here, 52% of people who use Twitter update their status daily, which means 48% of people are not doing this on a daily basis. My next column talks about users who log in via mobile devices. The next set of columns talk about users who log in daily. And the final set of columns are talking about users who located outside the USA. Right. Now we've looked at these graphs, we've tried to make sense of them, and now we're going to look at the actual question. And the first question is, give one example of a mobile device. Well, guys, the first one that comes to mind straight away, to me anyway, is a cell phone. Okay? So a cell phone is a good example of a mobile device. I'm sure you can think of 2 or 3 others. Right, I'm rather old, so I'm not into all this technology. But you young guys who use it on a daily basis, I'm sure you've already got 2 or 3 other examples as well. Right, our next question. Write down the percentage of Facebook users who logged in using mobile devices. So let's go straight up here. Users to log in using mobile devices, we're talking this section over here. And we're talking about those ones who log in with Facebook. And Facebook is represented by yellow, or the yellow column. So we know 30% of users are logging in via mobile devices, or logging into Facebook rather, with a mobile device. Okay. Guys, again, there's nothing difficult about this at all, is there? Of course there's not. And we don't expect it to be difficult. Why? Because we're looking at a paper 1. All the examiner wants to make sure on a paper 1 is, can you make sense of this graph? Don't interpret it, but can you read the different figures? Can you read the different data off that graph? Let's see what they ask in the next part of the question. The next question says this. Calculate the percentage of Facebook users who did not update their status daily. We spoke about that earlier, didn't we? So if we go and look at Facebook, and with Facebook we're looking at our yellow color, if you look there, we see that 12% of users do update daily. So how many don't? Well, a percentage is out of 100. So what we're going to say is we've got 100% minus this 12%. So minus 12%, and again, folk, our calculator would tell us 100 minus 12 is going to give me 88%. Okay. Next question. Determine the number of Twitter users that logged in daily. Okay. The number of Twitter users that logged in daily are going to be over here, and there are 27% of them. Okay, straightforward question, nothing difficult. 27%. We're going to take a quick break, and then we'll come back and we'll look at another question.